It's the end of the year. It's a time when a lot of people resolve to make a fresh start in the new year, and hopefully that includes my old stomping ground of the atheist community, which is going to get off to a fresh start in 2025 after finally jettisoning some excess baggage that's been weighing it down for far too long. To give you an idea specifically what I'm talking about, this is from an article by the absolutely indispensable Hemant Mehta at Friendly Atheist. Headline: Atheist Group Faces Backlash After Publishing, Then Removing Anti-Trans Article. Here are some quotes from the article. Somehow, in the span of about 24 hours, the Freedom from Religion Foundation made an egregious mistake, got plenty of well-deserved backlash for it, then quickly attempted to correct the problem. And you can bet they'll get plenty of undeserved backlash for trying to fix the error. This whole controversy dates back to a post on FFRF's Free Thought Now blog. Free Thought Now is the site where some FFRF staffers, lawyers, and interns elaborate on the group's work. In early November, former FFRF intern Kat Grant posted an article about how much of our society's views on gender are steeped in religious traditions. Seemed like a perfectly fine essay to me. It wasn't out of place for FFRF to publish it because it focused on the harm religion has played in our view of trans people, and Grant had worked with FFRF as a legal fellow. As far as I can tell, no one publicly complained about the article. Honestly, as with all blog posts these days, it's not clear how many people even saw it. Jerry Coyne, author of Why Evolution is True and Faith versus Fact, Why Science and Religion Are Incompatible, is another one of those atheists who has spent years spreading anti-trans rhetoric on his website. Coyne, however, also happens to be a member of FFRF's honorary board, a title the group bestows upon distinguished achievers who have made known their dissent from religion. As far as I know, it's a purely symbolic role, but Coyne asked FFRF if he could post a rebuttal to Grant's piece on the group's website, and someone at FFRF gave him the green light. That resulted in a piece published on Thursday called Biology is Not Bigotry, which, unlike other FFRF blog posts, opens with a disclaimer. The views in this column are of the author and do not necessarily reflect those of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. That suggests FFRF knew this essay might be problematic but decided to post it anyway. And problematic it was, after receiving a lot of pushback to the publication of this article from other less transphobic prominent people in the atheist community. FFRF decided to pull down Jerry Coyne's article, and they put up a statement co-signed by the founders of FFRF that reaffirmed the group's commitment to LGBTQ plus rights and acknowledged that publishing Jerry Coyne's piece had been a mistake, and expressing regret for publishing the piece and committing to learn from this experience and to do better from now on. So, I mean, it would have been better if they hadn't published it in the first place, but given the fact that they did publish it, this is about as good of a response as you could expect from an organization like this. So, good for FFRF. Not good for them publishing it in the first place, but good for them recognizing that they made a mistake and trying to correct it and resolving to do better and be better at living out their values in the future. One person who did not express regret over this episode, nor did he commit to learn and do better, was Jerry Coyne, the guy who wrote the article in the first place. He posted a response on his own website where he complained about being censored, and he lamented that FFRF was falling victim to what he called mission creep. Because FFRF was founded as a secular organization, as an organization devoted to educating the public about issues related to non-religious people and atheism and secularism, and to defending the separation of church and state, all of which are very, very important things that FFRF should be doing and is doing and does do as a matter of course. But Jerry Coyne didn't like the fact that they were wading into the gender identity subject. They were starting to talk about trans rights and trans issues because he considers that politics that has nothing to do with the stated mission of FFRF. And he just sort of complained about, oh, I wish you wouldn't involve yourselves in political activism because it only dilutes the very important core mission of the FFRF. And he also complained that by pulling down his article, and in response to pulling down his article, issuing a statement where they reaffirm the group's commitment to LGBTQ plus rights and equality, that in doing so, they implied that what Jerry Coyne had written was transphobic. Imagine that. And Jerry Coyne, of course, insists that what he wrote in the piece that I remind you was titled Biology is Not Bigotry, he insists there was nothing transphobic in his article. It's completely unfair to even suggest that what he wrote was transphobic. Here's a little bit of what Jerry Coyne wrote that has since been taken down. And, just kind of judge for yourself whether or not it's transphobic. Because some non-binary people, or men who identify as women, quote, trans women, unquote, feel that their identity is not adequately recognized by biology, they choose to impose ideology onto biology and concoct a new definition of woman. Here's something else that Jerry Coyne wrote from a little later in that piece. Transgender women should not compete athletically against biological women, should not serve as rape counselors and workers in battered women's shelters, or, if convicted of a crime, should not be placed in a women's prison. And in that same piece, Jerry Coyne also quotes some crime statistics from the UK out of context in order to argue falsely, I stress, that trans women are statistically more likely to be sexual predators than cis men or cis women, when in fact, as far as we can tell, the truth is pretty much exactly the opposite. That trans people, trans women included, in fact, perhaps even especially trans women, are far more likely to be victims of crimes, including sex crimes, on a percentage basis, on a proportional basis, than cis people. But anyway, so yeah, that's some of what Jerry Coyne had to say in his article. Nothing transphobic about that. Just denying that trans people's gender is remotely valid. Just sort of arguing that trans women being women, and he doesn't mention trans men because they never do, but trans men being men, that those genders are invalid, that they're against science, they're against biology. And then he argues that trans people should be, and again, trans women specifically, should be categorically banned from competing in sports with cis women and from serving as rape counselors and from working in battered women's shelters. And if convicted of crimes, should not be allowed to serve their time in a women's prison. He argues that they, not on a case-by-case basis, not on a basis that considers the various qualifications or needs of the individual, categorically, trans women should never be allowed to do these things simply because they are trans women. Nothing transphobic about that, is there? There is good news, though. There's good news, because in that same statement, in that same letter that he posted to his blog, where he pisses and moans about having his transphobic piece taken down from the FFRF's blog, Jerry Coyne also announces that he has resigned as a member of the FFRF honorary board. And not only has Jerry Coyne resigned, but two other prominent members of that board, Richard Dawkins and Steven Pinker, have also resigned in solidarity with their colleague and fellow transphobe, Jerry Coyne. And you know what? I'm going to let Hemet say it for me, because he says it exactly the way I would have said it anyway from his article. Quote, "Good riddance. It's always nice when the trash takes itself out. I urge FFRF to replace them with people who advance their cause instead of setting it back. Me too." And by the way, Hemet Mehta, as I've mentioned before in previous videos, is a good guy. He is one of the good ones in the atheist community. He has been for years. Do yourself a favor. If you are at all interested in atheism or skepticism, or just commentary and reporting from an atheist and skeptical, a secular viewpoint, do yourself a favor and check out The Friendly Atheist. It's linked in the description, as is the article that I'm reading from by Hemmett on this subject. So here's what I see as the problem with what Jerry Coyne and Dawkins and Pinker and other prominent figures in the atheist community who have expressed transphobic views. Here's what I see as the problem with what they're doing, and why I think it is inconsistent with their professed stance to be in favor of scientific fact and to be champions of reason and rationality and truth against superstition and bias and prejudice. All of these things that atheists say that we stand for. Jerry Coyne, Richard Dawkins, Steven Pinker, all of these other scientists who argue that trans women are not really women, that trans men are not really men, that people who have transgender identities don't really have those identities, and that there's a gender binary and everybody is either a man or a woman, and that's defined by their chromosomes or their genitals or whatever scientific definition that the transphobe in question has chosen, that's the way it is, and it's simple and it's cut and dry, and we don't need to make any room for trans people in any of our definitions, and that's just the way it is. Here's the problem with that. In doing that, they are rejecting the prevailing medical and scientific consensus on human gender, which says that gender is a spectrum. The current scientific consensus, at least to my layman's understanding, and please feel free to correct me on this, unless you're just going to use that invitation as an excuse to post some transphobic shit, in which case I'll delete your comment and ban you. But if you have something reasonable and non-prejudiced to say in response to what I'm about to say that will correct something that I say incorrectly, please feel free to do so. But my understanding of it is basically this. Most people, the great majority of people, do fall into one of the two traditional gender binary categories. Most people are cisgender, which means that their gender identity matches the gender identity that has traditionally been assigned to people that have their genitals. So most people are either a man or a woman, and that identity corresponds with their genitals, corresponds with their chromosomes, and that accounts for most human beings. But there are individuals, a significant portion of individuals, not a majority, not even probably a very large minority, but a statistically significant number of people whose gender identity does not fit into one of those two categories, or if it does, it's the category that is not the one they were assigned at birth based on their genitalia. Some of them were assigned male at birth, but then it turns out that they come to understand that actually they're not male, they are female, they are women. And we call those people trans women. And the opposite is true as well. There are people who were assigned female at birth, and they eventually come to realize that no, actually that was incorrect. They are men. And we call those people trans men. And there are also people who don't identify strongly with either binary, and we call those people non-binary or NB. And there are people who don't feel like their gender identity is fixed. It changes from time to time. It fluctuates. The way they understand their gender and the way they express their gender changes. And we call those people gender fluid. And there are all kinds of other categories that I'm not going to get into here, but there is a rich diversity in human gender that lies outside that binary. And even though the overwhelming number of people do fall into that binary, the people that fall outside of it exist, and they are real. And our understanding of human gender, especially when it comes to using that understanding to arrange our society and decide who should have rights and who shouldn't have rights and who should be allowed to do what, our understanding should include those people who fall outside the conventional male, female, assigned at birth binary. And if you care about science and you care about fact and you care about our scientific understanding representing reality, it doesn't strike me that this should be remotely controversial. This should be being treated by people like Coyne and Dawkins, etc., people who love science and claim to love the discovery in science and love when science tells us something that we didn't expect and expands our understanding of the universe. This should be good news. Hey, gender is a lot more complex than we thought it was 100 years ago. It turns out, yeah, most people are either a man or a woman, and that gender binary holds in most cases. But there are a whole bunch of people who fall outside of it. And they tell us that the experience of gender in the human being is a lot more interesting and a lot more dynamic and a lot more diverse than we thought it was. And isn't that cool? That seems to me to be the scientific opinion on that. That's the scientific reaction. Oh shit, isn't that cool? I want to learn more about that. I want to try to understand that more. I want to come up with a way of revising our ways of thinking and talking and categorizing ourselves on the basis of gender so that it accounts for all of this diversity that people didn't necessarily expect to find a long time ago when this gender binary was solidified and became the thing that a lot of people are starting to treat like sacred scripture that can never be touched and can never be revised. Like that, to me, seems like the scientific reaction. Oh, cool, this is unexpected. Let's find out more about this. That's not the reaction that Jerry Coyne has taken, nor Richard Dawkins, nor Steven Pinker, nor other prominent scientists who have been associated with the atheist movement. And it's sad to see, as someone who used to admire these people back in the day, because in their rejection of the medical and scientific consensus on gender, these great men of science are no different from the creationists that they've been arguing with over evolution and the age of the planet Earth for the last several decades, and specifically for the last 20 years or so since the new atheist movement came into prominence. How many times have we heard someone like Richard Dawkins or someone like Jerry Coyne argue with a creationist, especially a young Earth creationist, and very rightly call them to task for just throwing the scientific consensus out the window in favor of their mythologically based belief system? Oh, I guess almost every scientist in the world is wrong, but you and your literalist interpretation of your holy scripture is right. How many times have we seen these great people of science do that? And again, rightly so. Because for someone to just throw the entire consensus of science on a subject out the window and say, actually, all of those scientists are wrong, and it's me and the relatively tiny group of people who agree with me, we're the ones who are right. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. That's an absurdity. And people who are lay people who do not have an education or a fine professional level understanding of these subjects, we should not be listening to that tiny minority of people who say, you know, the earth is 10,000 years old and humans didn't evolve and everything is the result of the creation of God and humans are the result of a special creation, and that basically history as recorded in the Christian Bible is literally true. Like we shouldn't believe those people. We should trust instead in the overwhelming majority of scientists who say that the truth is something else. And Jerry Coyne and Richard Dawkins have been saying that for decades. And yet somehow when it comes to gender identity, they have now become the outliers. They have now become completely comfortable with throwing the scientific and medical consensus out the window because it disagrees with what they think. It disagrees with their preconceptions. It disagrees with what I think we can fairly at this point call their prejudices. And that's a sad thing to see. It's a sad thing to see because the people who have argued against scientific cranks in the realm of evolution and geology have now become the scientific cranks in the realm of gender identity. Atheists have spent most of this century very publicly telling ourselves and telling anyone in the rest of the world who will listen that we are committed to reason and to truth and to science. And the question that I ask myself as I read things like this is that really true? Do we mean that when we say that we're committed to these things? And if it is true, then why should we embrace the scientific consensus on evolution? And by the way, why should we also embrace the scientific consensus on climate change and the scientific consensus on every other subject, but then reject it when it comes to human gender? What sense does that make? The scientific consensus has it right in every other field of study, but somehow it's gotten it incredibly wrong when it comes to gender? Really? Again, doesn't sound very scientific to me. It comes down to this. If you respect human rights, then you need to respect the human rights of everyone, including trans people. And if you really respect human rights, then you need to not only respect the rights of trans people, you need to be fighting for those rights alongside trans people if you are a cis person. Because trans people right now in the United States and the UK, where a lot of this discourse originates, but all over the world, trans people are facing widespread, powerful efforts, politically, judicially, socially, to deprive them of those rights, to deprive them of those basic human rights that everybody deserves, that everybody should have. And if you say you respect science, then, especially if you are a layperson like me, like most of you, then you need to respect science. And you need to respect the scientific consensus on gender, just like you would respect the science on any other subject. And when it comes to gender, that's where we should be taking our lead from that scientific and medical consensus, from that consensus that tells us that gender is a spectrum, that human gender includes a gender binary that does account for most people, but also includes individuals that fall outside of that binary, and that therefore it is best and most accurately expressed and understood as a spectrum rather than just a rigid, unbreakable binary. That's the consensus that we lay people should be taking our lead from, not from outliers to that consensus like Jerry Coyne and Richard Dawkins and Steven Pinker and others, people who were once respected thinkers but have lately started to sound a lot more like that kid from Kindergarten Cop.